today, what we're going to talk about is we're going to provide some tips, tricks, and resources to help you get started with your historical marker research. So with that, I will share my slides. So just to provide some really quick background on the State Historical Marker Program, it started in 2009. So at that point, the New Jersey Historical Commission was tasked with managing the around 400 some historical markers that were installed by the state in the 20th century. Then last year, we formed a partnership with Revolution NJ, which is New Jersey's official partnership to commemorate America's 250th, to launch this 250th initiative. So as part of this initiative, we are accepting nominations from the community on what new markers should be installed and which 20th century markers that are currently damaged should be replaced. So if you'd like to learn more about the program in general, I'll go ahead and drop that link in the chat. I do want to note that today we are not going to be going over the application guidelines for how to submit the application itself. If you're interested in a review of the guidelines, we do have a video on that on our YouTube channel that kind of goes in detail about the requirements and then also how to actually fill out the application itself. So here's the link to that. But that being said, there are two aspects of the guidelines I do want to highlight here today because they are particularly important to keep in mind while you're doing the research for your historical marker. The first is that we are going to look for markers that look at the full history of the American Revolution. And what I mean by that is that we're looking at things, the origins of the revolution itself, and its legacy. So that's a really, really big timeline that can encompass a lot of New Jersey's history. But we're going to ground it in the 250th by tying it back to this thematic framework. So in the application, you will be asked to, say which of these themes your marker falls into. It can fall into more than one. So that's something to keep in mind. Leah has dropped information about each of these themes into the chat, so you can go in there and learn a little bit more about them. The other item, which is super crucial for, for research, is that we will ask you to provide sources for the claims that you make in your historical marker text. Specifically, we will look for primary sources or original documents, firsthand accounts, objects that were created during the time of the event that's being discussed. We'll also ask as an optional addition for secondary sources. These are descriptions of events that retell, analyze, or interpret events based on the primary sources. That description is a really surface level one. When we talk about research, there's always a lot of nuances. College courses have an entire semester that will get into some of this, but that's kind of the main breakdown to keep in mind. Is this a source that was taken at the time, firsthand account of what's going on? Or is this, a book that might be recounting what happened later? Something, a nice, easy way to divide the two. So why do we ask for historical research as part of this application? Well, we really want to make sure that the information that we are providing on these markers is accurate. The markers that we're going to install are going to last probably more than 100 years. The picture that's on this slide, that's a marker from the 1930s. As you can still tell, it's still going strong. And we are going to be putting in markers that's of a similar material. So we want to make sure that we are providing the most accurate information that we can for the public so that they can trust the information that's on the markers that they see for decades going forward. So that's why we do research. But why are we asking for primary sources specifically? Well, they're a really key way to confirm the historical accuracy of what is on the marker. Just like in a game of telephone, sometimes the information that we get secondhand can just be wrong. Or maybe it's like a half truth, right? So when you're reading a primary source, you might realize that the secondary source that you read about the general topic in left out some really crucial information. Or maybe they kind of muddled the waters to make the historical fact fit the story they wanted to tell and not the story of what really happened. By going to the primary source, you have the ability to look at the facts yourself instead of relying on someone else to tell them to you. And also, you might learn more about the topic than you might think. By digging into the details, that's when we learn some new, exciting information. It can also be a really fun way to, maybe get an idea for something else. As Leah's going to show, a lot of newspapers are great sources. And when you're looking at a newspaper, you're going to see more than one article. So it might spark something new, which is also a fun little benefit. But all that said about how important primary sources are, secondary sources are still super important. So secondary sources give us the long-term perspective that is impossible to get from primary sources. Because primary sources happened at the time of the event. So you can't get, what happened then? What happened next? What did this lead to? You can't get that sort of historical context from the primary source, most likely. Secondary sources are really, really helpful for that. They're also really helpful because they provide the historical context of what's going on. They'll give you background to help you understand why the event is important and kind of what were some surrounding conditions at the time that might not be referenced in a primary source because, if we're talking about a diary from 1920, they're probably not going to state that there is no internet because that is a given to them in that moment. However, when we're reading a secondary source, that might be an important thing to remind readers when they're thinking about how events unfolded. Additionally, another point that makes secondary sources really helpful for the historical marker applications is that we will be asking how the proposed subject made a lasting impression on local, state, or national history. This historical significance portion will be weighted quite heavily in the selection, by the selection committee. So we definitely recommend taking time to carefully consider this portion, and secondary sources can be a really great help when you're thinking through what is the historical significance of this topic? Why is it important for the public to know it and for us to commemorate it in our public spaces? Finally, secondary sources are super helpful because they are written based on primary sources. And if they are a good secondary source, they should be citing them. And I guess I should pause here and say, if you're looking at a secondary source and it's not citing where it got its information from, that's not a good secondary source to be using for this project. So the fact that they've listed them can be a really nice way for you to go, oh, hey, this is located in this archive. Maybe I can get access to that and look at the letter they based it on, for example. I also want to note with secondary sources is that some are stronger than others. Um, you know, that is a value judgment that we all have to kind of make for ourselves when we're looking at how the author put the information together. But just something broadly to think about is while there can be blogs of various different historical accuracy, something like a book published, by a university press, an article that has been peer reviewed, those have gone through some vetting process. And that's probably going to be stronger and provide you with more accurate information just because it's had more eyes on it. So secondary sources are excellent and important. It's also just important to keep in mind how they were composed. And kind of as we're thinking through, these different sources that we have, I do want to just make a note of biases in sources. So I don't want to bog you all down too much into the weeds. We're not asking for you in this application to write a historical book. So, we understand that I'm not asking you to go in and really delve into the biases of every source that you use. However, whenever you're doing historical research for any project, it's always good to keep two questions in mind. One, what was the goal of the author when creating this item? And two, who is the intended audience? So just kind of an example to illustrate this point, I was working on a project looking at early education in Jamaica, a lot of which was run by missionaries. And you can find out a lot about what happened in the classroom through the letters that the missionaries wrote back to their home offices in England. And that's great. Love to find more information. But these missionaries are funded by these people, right? So they're going to be writing saying what an amazing job they're doing. And it's just important to keep in mind when I was reading those letters that I should probably find other ways to prove that they're doing as good of a job as they say they're doing, because they're writing back home and they're trying to say, hey, I deserve more money or the same amount of money to keep my job. So just an example of it's important to think about who's writing it and for what purpose. So that was obviously a very quick rundown about some just general research things to keep in mind while you're doing this. Now I'm going to switch to an example to show how this could be put into practice. So I imagine that a lot of you probably already have a marker topic in mind. But for this example, let's just pretend, that I don't know what my marker topic is going to be, but I know that I want to write one. So I'm going to start by looking into some just really general New Jersey histories so I can see what's out there. And, one really great source for that would be the Encyclopedia of New Jersey. So in there, I found an entry for the Paterson Silk Strike, and which I thought was interesting. It fits with the Revolution NJ themes of revolutionary ideals, work, protests, better working conditions, fighting for additional rights. It also fits into the theme of New Jersey as a battleground, because you may have noticed that that battleground was in quotes. So it includes both actual battles, but also a battleground of ideas. So with that in mind, I think that this is a good topic for me to move forward with. But before I go any further, I want to make sure that there aren't already historical markers, talking about this topic. So I check first the State Historical Marker Database, which is the database of the 20th century markers. There is a National Historical Marker Database, which is literally just called that. It is super helpful. That talks about a bunch, obviously, of markers nationwide. Then there is also a site, Clio. I'll drop all those links into the chat if my computer is going to be nice to me. Let's see. No, it didn't come through that way. That's fine. I will get those to you very shortly. Okay, we'll get you those links. But for now, just going to pop to the next part. So now that I know that I have a topic, it fits the Revolution NJ themes, and there is not a marker currently commemorating it, it's time for me to start gathering information for the application. And thank you so much, Leah, for dropping those links into the chat. So when you're looking for background information, here are a couple places that you can start just thinking generally. As I mentioned before, kind of general New Jersey histories are really great. You have a history of New Jersey, A History of the Garden State by Maxine Laurie and Rich Veit. It's a really good one. The Encyclopedia of New Jersey is another excellent source. There's several of these out there. They can be nice for, finding that general context about the story that you're trying to tell. If you're not sure where to start with that, local reference librarians are incredible. They are going to have, they're definitely going to be able to help you find this general background information. If they don't know, I'm sure that they will reference you to someone else who does. We all love our public libraries, are very grateful. They are a wonderful resource to be using for this project. So I highly encourage you to talk to your local reference librarian for assistance. Additionally, there is Google Scholar, which, if you're unfamiliar with it, is a, it's like Google, but for academic publications. It's a really great resource. However, a lot of it can be behind a paywall, as a lot of academic articles are. If you find something that is particularly helpful, I do recommend taking it to your local library. They might have interlibrary loan abilities to get the article for you. However, there are some articles on Google Scholar that are also freely available. So I don't want to discourage you from ever using it, but just want to let you know that's a resource there with a caveat. So going back to the example, to learn more about the Paterson Silk Strike, I looked at the following secondary sources. Of course, as I mentioned several times, I looked at the Encyclopedia of New Jersey. I also looked at a book called The Fragile Bridge, The Paterson Silk Strike. And there is a great exhibit about the Paterson Silk Strike at the American Labor Museum. From these sources, I found out a lot of different things. Depending on which source I read, there was somewhere between 23,000 and 25,000 workers who went on strike in 1913 to protest the introduction of a four-loom system, which would increase their work and reduce their pay. This is different from the two-loom system that they were currently working with. I also learned that the strike was characterized by nonviolence, democratic control, and the involvement of writers and artists, particularly from Greenwich Village. Additionally, the industrial workers of the world, they got involved with this strike, providing, motivational speeches during the weekly Sunday rally. They also put on a pageant at Madison Square Garden to bolster support for the strikers, which was great because it gained national attention. Additionally, I was able to learn that this was in a broader context of the Industrial Revolution and the fight for labor rights, which really we can kind of think about as like the pursuit of happiness, right? So with that, now that I had, information from my secondary sources, it was time to confirm through the primary sources. I found a number of different newspapers that were really helpful for this. In Chronicling America, Historic American Newspapers. This is a free resource through the Library of Congress. It is a really, really wonderful starting point. So we highly recommend. I also went to the Industrial Workers of the World online archive to find pamphlets and speeches. Additionally, I was able to find that Rutgers University Community Repository, which it's not behind any paywall with their library. Anyone can access this. They had some oral histories with folks who remembered the strike. It's pretty cool. From this, I confirmed a lot of what was found in the secondary sources. So again, I found slightly differing numbers of how many people were in the strike, but it talked about the large pageant, when it started, when it ended, with the, why people were going on strike during this time. And also, what the workers were hoping to gain. So I took all this information that I got from my secondary sources and my primary sources, and I went to draft a marker text. So I started with the context. As labor conditions changed during the Industrial Revolution, workers came together to demand better conditions. After establishing the context, I presented the topic. One prominent example is the Patterson Silk Strike. In 1913, over 23,000 workers went on strike to protest long hours, reduction in pay, and the demanding four-loom system. You'll notice there, I just, used over 23,000 to make sure it was accurate when I was seeing slightly different numbers. Then I had space to provide a little additional information. So the industrial workers of the world supported the strike, bringing national and international attention to the cause. To build solidarity, workers met weekly at the Bottle House in Haledon. That last sentence was important because that's where I'm imagining that this marker location would be, is probably close to the Bottle House, since that was where the workers would rally for those weekly gatherings. Finally, I stated the significance. So after 5 months, the strike ended with few immediate gains, but its memory fueled the advancement of workers' rights for years to come. The significance is definitely, as I mentioned before, something to keep in mind because it will be weighted heavily in the answer of the application. What I will say though, when you're drafting your marker text is, while we love to see a strong draft marker text, it is wonderful. We will work together on the final marker text once the application is approved. So we are happy to answer any questions you have about drafting the marker text, but really that is something for us to work together on once the topic has made its way through the approval process. For those who are wondering, this that I put together is at 627 characters with spaces, which brings us just under the limit of 635 that you'll have to draft your marker text. All right. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to Leah, who is going to provide us a rundown of what resources we have to do this research.
Share this. So We've put together some guides that kind of provide a collection of resources to kind of help you during this process. So I'm just going to go over three of those and then also go into two examples of resources that we included that could again help you with this process. So we're going to start off with our research guide. And just as a note that we will be adding all these documents to the State Historical Marker page, kind of like within the next week, along with the recording of this webinar too. So we have our kind of our research guide. So the topic kind of goes over again what Rachel went over earlier about the differences between primary and secondary sources to give you an idea of kind of like the differences between those two, and as well as some examples of records that you could use to as part of your research. So government records, which could include contracts, the census, pension records. A lot of those are kind of, some are accessible online, some you may need to go to an archive to see, but those are some great ways to get kind of information. And then we have our institutional records, the cemetery or church or fraternal organization. Another great way to get some more information is published history. So we have your county may have like a published history of like that county or your municipality. And then family papers, which can include deeds, letters and diaries, photographs, and genealogical information. And then directories or gazettes are another great way to kind of find some information about like a local community or municipality, whether through like city directories can tell you an address of something and like how kind of like long it was operating for. And then some social directories could tell you kind of how long someone was living in a certain location. And then newspapers and journals are another kind of very popular and well-used primary source. So you can use like articles, which could discuss significant local events or something that was going on nationally. Then oral histories are kind of a really great way to kind of understand what was going on. Can describe like the social history or business history. And as Rachel stated earlier, Rutgers has a great collection in their special collections. And so we provided some examples of like online sources that you use to start this process. And then kind of another overview of how to craft your proposed text. And then we'll look at our statewide resources. So we just kind of, again, put together a large collection of places you could go. So these top ones are kind of a more overview of New Jersey. So the New Jersey Digital Highway, which is run by Rutgers, the New Jersey Digital Newspaper Project, which is also operated by Rutgers, which has a kind of a collection of major newspapers that operated in New Jersey kind of throughout like the 19th and 20th century. The New Jersey Historical Society, the New Jersey State Archives, the New Jersey State Library, just kind of some of the places that you could start off with, and people there could point you in the right direction for any research you need to do. And they have some general online resources. So Chronicling America, again, is a great place to go to kind of find some newspapers. There's a lot of local newspapers there that you can find to help with your process. The Library of Congress has a specific kind of collection on their website just for New Jersey. So you can go there to get some resources there. National Archives and Records Administration. The New York Public Library does, which we'll kind of look at a little bit later, has a great collection of maps of New Jersey. And then some of the colleges in the state have put together very some special collections that you could go to either look at like a more local history. So if you look at like Monmouth, you can they have collections about kind of the history of the school and like in that area, as well as Rutgers has a very large and dense special collections archives. And then we have Stockton and William Patterson, some great places to start. And then we also included some resources about AAPI history in New Jersey, African American history, New Jersey, Latino and Latina, Indigenous. So these are all that you'll be able to kind of use the links to get to maybe hopefully develop some good idea of where else to look or some kind of preliminary information about your marker topic. And then we also put together resources based for each county. So we have some like historical societies, which is another great place to start at if you're looking to do a marker it kind of like really focuses on your like local community. And then we just kind of broke them down. So we have one for Bergen County and Burlington, and this is not all encompassing. So if there is something that we've missed that you think should be included, feel free to reach out to us so we can add it. We did try to put as many as we could locate for each county. And you can kind of scroll through and look at see what is offered in your county to kind of get started on this process. So once you kind of have kind of find out that's like located what's out there, that would be good for your marker. Definitely, as Rachel said, it's always like a great idea to kind of contact you, like look at your local library and talk to your reference library, maybe your historical society as well, since they will probably have a lot of archives as well. If you can also, some of the online resources we provided are also a great starting point. So we're going to look at like two of those right now. So we have the New York Public Library, I mentioned, has a really great collection of maps, digitized maps of New Jersey. So we kind of like already linked to there. So they have like different like whole maps, parts, some cities and counties. So just for an example, you can then search when you get to your New Jersey section. We want to search this collection. So for example, if we're putting up a marker in Hoboken, you can, and you want to do a marker maybe commemorating like a rail line in Hoboken, you can look at this map to see kind of really where it ran through. So you can put this up and you can zoom in and you kind of see that, kind of find what you're looking for here. And this could be, creating a map is like a really great resource to show where something was located. It's a little blurry here, but where something was located. So you kind of get a better idea of where maybe your marker should go. And then another great resource again is your local library. So the Newark Public Library has a really great digitized collection of city directories and newspapers, maps, and like which you can all browse even if you are not like living in Newark and a member of their library. So just for example, we can look at their digitized newspapers, and we have like the Newark Herald. And let's say you wanted to make a marker that commemorated maybe like the efforts of the students who kind of fought for the desegregation of schools in New Jersey. You can search through these newspapers. You do search text content, so we can search for Leon Williams. He's one of the students who's involved in that. And so there's two newspaper articles here. So if you click on one, it'll actually kind of highlight it'll come up with all the names, but you kind of search in here. Is not the one we want. For the name. And then we can also look here. And again, I'll show you all the results. So we want to make sure we have the right one because it's going to show you everyone that's last name Williams. So page 2. So we see his name highlighted here. So we can look at this article about Hilburn that was continued from page 1. Let me go back to page 1. And we see Hilburn, New York school closed. And kind of gives you like the first part of the article that kind of talks about kind of the involvement of the NAACP. and then continue on page 2. And newspapers are also a great way you can find out what else is going on in that time, during that time as well. See, like, to kind of provide a broader context of like your historical event. And we are here to help with kind of with your research process. So if you have any questions or you need like some guidance on some resources to kind of get you started, you can reach out to us at njhc.programs@sos.nj.gov.
Thank you so much for that overview, Leah, of all of those resources. Just to reiterate what you said, we will be getting all of those links up onto our website, and then we will send out all those resources along with the slides from today's presentation to everyone who registered for this webinar. Folks have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat or into the Q&A. I do want to say thank you to Scott, who did correct me on my marker text, which I greatly appreciate. The marker text has to be less than 605 characters with spaces, not 635, like I said. Apologies, that was an old number. So I will have to go back to my marker text and take out 30 of those characters. If you're wondering about the title for your markers, those need to be less than 50 characters. And more information about all of that, the final numbers are all in our guidelines. Do you want to answer that one, Leah?
Yeah, so the recording of this, as well as all the resources, the documents we showed you, will be available on the New Jersey State Historical Marker page.
So it'll probably be going up early next week, so that we can also upload the recording of the webinar. So we'll send out a notification once everything is live. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions. Just to recap, a couple that were coming in from the chat. Oh, never mind. We've got a couple coming in. So I'll just continue with this train of thought, and then we'll go to the ones that have just come. So as a reminder, if you're doing a replacement marker for a one that was installed in the 20th century, we are still going to ask for primary sources. That's because the markers were installed, the latest ones would have been in the 1970s. And fortunately, because history is ever evolving and changing, we've learned a lot in the last 50 years. So, and a lot of things that we thought at the time, we have now found out more information and maybe they're not necessarily true. So that is the reasoning behind why we're asking for sources, even for replacement ones. It's just because, so much has changed since that time, let alone the ones that might be from the 20s and 30s. Leah, do you have a good source for troop movements and placements during the Rev War?
I think for that, a good place to start could be looking at the Library of Congress in George Washington. They have a great, really large collection of George Washington records. If that's kind of the person you're looking, if you're trying to focus on like his troops movements. Also looking if you are trying to focus on like a specific municipality or an area in which he was in, it may be a good idea to also look at kind of like that town, again, going to like a reference library and seeing what they have as part of their collection. And they're great. If it's like somewhere in the area of Morristown, you could contact the Morristown National Historical Park, and they may be able to provide you with some information as well.
Thank you. And I saw that Patrick dropped in the chat that founders.archives.gov apparently also has street movements, which is new to me. So thank you. Always love learning something new. Another question was, can existing markers be updated with new information? 100%. We love to do that. A lot of the markers actually have fewer characters than what the 605 can feel short, or at least it did to me when I was drafting one, but it is more information than some of the older ones provide. So we love to embellish. It does not have to be an exact replica of what was put up in the 20th century. So yes, please feel free to add new information as you see fit. Another question that we got earlier that I just kind of wanted to expand upon for a moment is the question is, if a site already has a county marker, are you still eligible for a state marker? And in general, we are looking to not duplicate markers if one is already there. However, there might be exceptions or reasons why another one might be appropriate. From the example of the question that was asked, looking at a 72-acre site. So folks, I'm imagining in this scenario, might be entering the site from different areas. That is one that we might discuss. However, especially if it is a county marker, all those discussions would be with the county office. So if they say, no, we're not interested in having a second marker there, we would respect the wishes of the county. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're looking to get multiple markers. Give it another minute for folks. If you have any last questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat or in the Q&A. So we just got the question, what's the deadline? That is a really great question. We've got a couple. So the first deadline is July 25th. So we're calling that our early bird deadline. That is obviously quite soon. This is a lot to do, so don't stress, that's not our only one. That's basically, if you can get it in by then, it just gives you a little bit more lead time for us to look it over, maybe provide some feedback if there's anything that we see as staff members that might make it a little bit stronger before it goes out to the advisory committee. So that's our early bird. Then we have August 12th. So that is our first round deadline. Then we have kind of a larger stretch. Our final deadline for this is going to be October 7th. So that is the last deadline for this initiative, will be that October 7th. So that's really the one to make sure you're keeping in mind. The advantage to applying for one of these earlier deadlines is, again, there's an issue that is probably like easily resolved, but might cause a hiccup going through the approval process. It does give a little bit more time for us to flag it, send it back, ask for an update, which is something we won't be able to do for that October 7th deadline, just because that is the final one. So there won't be another round afterwards. So there are a couple of opportunities to get those in. And actually, as I say that about the advisory committee, I do want to just say that as staff, we are not a part of the approval process. The way that the markers are approved, they're approved by the advisory committee that is composed of county representatives and subject matter experts. Anything that goes from it's approved by the advisory committee, then gets approved at a public vote by the New Jersey Historical Commission itself. We did this for multiple reasons, including the fact that that means that as staff, we are here to help you with your nominations without a conflict of interest. So if you have questions, reach out. We're here to help. And then we can also, alert you when we're like, hey, we saw this when we were going through just the eligibility check. We can send it back again. But all of our input, if we say something, it's not a guarantee, but it's also means that, again, we don't have that conflict when we get into the approval process. If there are no other questions, then I will drop our email once again into the chat. This is the best way to reach both Leah and I. We are here to help answer any questions that you might have. And we really appreciate you all joining us here today and look forward to reading your application.